Jessalyn Mercer, 34, sat in stunned silence as her sister Victoria's words hung in the air. "We didn't order for your son." The restaurant's ambient chatter seemed to fade away as Jessalyn watched Victoria's children eagerly cut into their $100 Wagyu steaks. Meanwhile, her 10-year-old son Parker stared at the empty space before him, his stomach audibly growling. What should have been a celebratory family dinner was about to unravel decades of secrets, lies, and the illusion of blood loyalty Jessalyn had desperately clung to. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into this family betrayal that changed everything, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this kind of family drama resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Trust me, what happens next in this family revenge saga will have you questioning everything about sisterly bonds. Now let's continue with how this fateful dinner began. The Mercer family had always presented themselves as the picture of American success. Jessalyn and Victoria, just 2 years apart, were raised in an affluent suburb of Boston by their parents, Richard and Eleanor Mercer. Richard had built a successful real estate empire from nothing, and Eleanor managed their social calendar with military precision. From the outside, they were perfect. Charity galas, summer homes in the Hamptons, and Christmas cards, featuring beaming smiles against professionally photographed backdrops. But beneath that glossy veneer, resentments festered. Victoria, the elder sister, had always been the favorite. She had inherited their mother's striking looks, tall, blonde, and effortlessly elegant. She married Bradley Thompson, a surgeon from a respected family, and produced 2 perfect children, Sophia and William, now 12 and 14. Her life was a carefully curated Instagram feed of vacation homes, private school uniforms, and charity board memberships. Jessalyn had taken a different path. With her mother's dark hair, but none of her grace, according to Eleanor's frequent reminders, Jessalyn had struggled to meet the exacting Mercer standards. She'd married her college sweetheart Marcus, who came from a middle-class background and worked as a high school history teacher. Their son Parker was sweet but shy, more interested in comic books than the lacrosse and sailing lessons his cousins excelled in. The tensions between the sisters had escalated dramatically over the past 5 years. It started when their father Richard became ill with early-onset Alzheimer's. As his condition deteriorated, family dynamics shifted. Victoria positioned herself as the dutiful daughter, visiting their parents' home frequently and documenting every moment with photos shared in the family group chat. Meanwhile, Jessalyn worked quietly behind the scenes, organizing his medical care and spending long, unglamorous hours helping her father through his confusion and distress. "Your sister makes time despite her busy schedule," Eleanor would comment pointedly during Jessalyn's visits. "She brought your father those French pastries he loves yesterday. He remembered those at least." What Eleanor never mentioned was how Jessalyn had spent the previous night sleeping in a chair beside her father's bed during a particularly bad episode, or how she was the one who remembered all his medications. The most recent source of tension had emerged 6 months ago, when Richard, during a moment of lucidity, had mentioned making changes to his will. "I need to make sure everyone's taken care of properly," he had mumbled to Jessalyn while Victoria was out of the room. "Things aren't always what they seem, Jess." When Victoria returned and found them in serious conversation, her smile had tightened. Within days, she had arranged for their father to move to an exclusive memory care facility, effectively limiting Jessalyn's private access to him. Tonight's dinner at Bordeaux, Boston's most exclusive new restaurant, was allegedly a celebration of Richard's 70th birthday, though he himself remained at the facility deemed too confused for the outing by Victoria and Eleanor. Jessalyn had protested, but as usual she was overruled. "It's for the best," dear Eleanor had said dismissively. "We wouldn't want to upset him with too much stimulation." Jessalyn had reluctantly agreed to come without her father bringing Marcus and Parker along. Her husband had squeezed her hand supportively as they entered the restaurant, whispering, "Just 2 hours, then we can escape." Now, as Jessalyn stared at her son's empty place setting while Victoria's children tucked into their expensive steaks, something inside her finally snapped. The decades of quiet acceptance of being the family afterthought crystallized in that single moment of blatant exclusion. "What do you mean you didn't order for Parker?" Jessalyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria dabbed her lips with her napkin, not meeting Jessalyn's eyes. "Mother and I decided this would be an adults-only dinner with just Sophia and William joining. I thought Marcus would have told you. We only reserved 6 seats." Jessalyn turned to her husband, who looked as shocked as she felt. "I never received any such message," Marcus said. "Well," Eleanor interjected smoothly, "there must have been a miscommunication. Perhaps we could order something for the boy now." She signaled for a waiter without any real urgency. Jessalyn noticed how her mother said the boy instead of her grandson's name. She also noticed the smirk playing at the corners of her niece Sophia's mouth, the knowing look exchanged between Victoria and Bradley. This hadn't been a mistake. This had been deliberate. "Parker," Jessalyn said quietly to her son, who was trying his best not to look upset, "would you like me to order you the steak too?" Before Parker could respond, Victoria cut in. "They're actually out of the Wagyu now. Last call was with our order." Her smile was sympathetic, but her eyes were cold. "I'm sure they have some chicken fingers, or something similar." The waiter arrived, and Eleanor ordered Parker whatever simple dish you have for children without consulting him. Parker, who had recently developed a sophisticated palate and hated being treated like a baby, sank lower in his seat. In that moment, as Jessalyn watched her family's casual cruelty toward her son, something changed inside her. A lifetime of slights and dismissals coalesced into a burning determination. She would no longer play the accommodating sister, the overlooked daughter. It was time to uncover what her father had been trying to tell her about the family's secrets. And if those secrets were as damaging as she suspected, perhaps it was finally time for some long overdue justice. 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner, Jessalyn found herself sitting in her car outside her parents' sprawling colonial home. Eleanor was hosting her weekly bridge club, which meant the house would be filled with her mother's equally judgmental friends for at least 3 hours. It was the perfect opportunity. Using the spare key she'd kept after her father's move to the care facility, Jessalyn slipped inside and headed straight for Richard's study. The room remained untouched, a shrine to the man he once was. Leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco still lingering in the air despite years of disuse. She wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for, but Richard's cryptic words had haunted her for months. "Things aren't always what they seem, Jess." Methodically, she began searching through his desk drawers. Most contained what she expected: financial statements, property deeds, insurance policies. But in the bottom drawer, locked but easily opened with the letter opener from the desk, she found something unexpected: a worn leather journal with her father's initials embossed on the cover. Richard Mercer had never struck her as the journaling type. Curious, she opened it and began to read. The entries dated back nearly 30 years, around the time Victoria was born. As she flipped through the pages, certain passages leaped out at her. Eleanor insists on naming her Victoria after her grandmother. "I have my doubts about the whole arrangement, but the papers are signed now. What's done is done." Several entries later, Jessalyn Amelia Mercer, born today, 7 pounds 2 ounces. "My daughter. My actual flesh and blood. I never expected to feel this way, this rush of protection and love. Eleanor seems indifferent, says she's done her part now." Jessalyn's hands began to tremble as she continued reading. The journal detailed a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement between families. Eleanor, from old money that had largely disappeared, had married Richard for his new wealth and promising future. But the arrangement had included an understanding. Eleanor would provide Richard with an heir, but after that, they would lead largely separate lives while maintaining the appearance of a happy family. The most shocking revelation came in an entry dated just after Victoria's second birthday. E continues to parade V around like a show pony to her friends. The child doesn't even look like either of us, but no one dares mention it. The agreement was that E could have her freedom as long as there was an heir. I never expected her to take it quite so literally, bringing in a stranger's child and passing it off as mine. At least with Jessalyn, I know she's truly my daughter. Jessalyn sat back, stunned. Victoria wasn't her father's biological daughter. She wasn't even Eleanor's biological daughter if she was interpreting correctly. She was essentially adopted, but under the pretense of being their natural child. As she continued reading, more pieces fell into place. Eleanor had arranged for a private adoption through connections that had skirted legal channels. Victoria had no idea. No one did except Richard and Eleanor. And now Jessalyn. Further in the journal, she found something else. References to financial arrangements that didn't make sense. Large sums of money moving through shell companies, properties being transferred under suspicious circumstances. Richard had been meticulous in his documentation, perhaps as insurance. A noise from downstairs startled her. The bridge game must have ended early. Quickly, she took photos of the most relevant journal pages with her phone and returned everything to its place. She was about to leave when she spotted a business card tucked into the journal. Martin Abernathy, private investigator, with a handwritten note, found what you asked for. Call to discuss. The card looked recent. She pocketed it just as she heard her mother's voice calling up the stairs. Is someone up there? Marianne thought she heard footsteps. Jessalyn quickly exited through the bathroom window onto the garage roof, a route she'd perfected in her rebellious teenage years. By the time Eleanor checked the study, Jessalyn was driving away, her mind racing with implications. That evening, after Parker was in bed, she showed the journal photos to Marcus. "My God," he whispered as he scrolled through them. "This explains so much about how they've treated you. You're Richard's only biological child. And potentially his only legal heir," Jessalyn added quietly. "Those financial records looked suspicious. I think Victoria and my mother might have been siphoning money from my father's companies for years. That could be what he wanted to tell me before Victoria isolated him." "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked, concern etched on his face. Jessalyn stared out the window at the night sky. "First I'm going to call this private investigator. Then I'm going to find out exactly what Victoria and my mother have been hiding. And then..." She turned to face her husband, a new determination in her eyes. "Then I'm going to make sure my father's wishes are respected, and that Parker gets what he deserves as Richard Mercer's only grandchild." The next morning, Martin Abernathy agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe across town. The investigator was a grizzled man in his 60s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Your father hired me 6 months ago," he confirmed, sliding a folder across the table. He suspected financial irregularities in his company's transactions he couldn't remember authorizing. Given his condition, he wanted someone to look into it discreetly. And Jessalyn prompted, "And he was right to be suspicious. Your sister and mother have been systematically draining his accounts and companies for years. They've set up a network of shell companies that funnel money to offshore accounts. Conservative estimate they've diverted at least $15 million. Jessalyn felt the blood drain from her face. $15 million. At least Abernathy nodded grimly. "Your father realized something was wrong when he reviewed some documents during a lucid period. He couldn't prove anything, which is why he hired me. Does he know about Victoria, that she's not his biological daughter? That came up during my investigation, yes. It's partially why he was planning to change his will, to ensure you and your son were protected. But before he could, he was moved to that fancy facility where all visitors are screened. As Jesselyn left the meeting clutching the folder of evidence, a plan began to form in her mind. The family dinner incident had been merely a symptom of a much larger betrayal. Victoria and Eleanor hadn't just excluded Parker from a meal, they had been systematically erasing Richard's true legacy while stealing his fortune. That evening she made 2 phone calls. The first was to an attorney specializing in financial fraud. The second was to her father's care facility, where she requested a private visit for the following day. Justice was coming for the Mercer family, and it would begin with the truth. The Oak Ridge Memory Care Facility resembled a luxury resort more than a medical institution, with its manicured gardens and elegant architecture. Jesselyn signed in at the reception desk, tensing slightly as she wrote her name. Since Richard's admission, Victoria had implemented a strict visitor approval system, positioning herself as his primary caregiver and decision-maker. "I'm here to see my father, Richard Mercer," Jesselyn told the receptionist, a young woman with a sympathetic smile. The receptionist checked her computer and frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, Miss Mercer, but you're not on today's approved visitor list. Let me call Mrs. Thompson to confirm." "Actually," Jesselyn said, smoothly sliding across a document, "I have temporary guardianship approval from Judge Harrington. It was filed yesterday. You'll see it gives me visitation rights regardless of any previous arrangements." The document, expedited by her new attorney after reviewing Abernathy's evidence, was legitimate. The receptionist examined it carefully before nodding. "Of course, Miss Mercer. Your father is in the garden pavilion for his morning tea. Would you like me to show you the way?" Jesselyn declined the escort, knowing the layout from her previous visits. As she walked through the facility's plush corridors, she rehearsed what she would say. Her father's lucidity varied day by day, sometimes hour by hour. She needed him clear-headed for this conversation. She found Richard sitting alone at a table, staring at a chessboard with pieces arranged mid-game. His silver hair was neatly combed and he wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly salary. Despite his illness, he maintained the dignified bearing that had intimidated business rivals for decades. "Daddy," Jesselyn said softly. Richard looked up, his eyes momentarily confused before recognition dawned. "Jesselyn. My Jessie." His smile was genuine, lighting up his entire face. "They said you couldn't visit anymore." "Who said that, Dad?" She sat beside him, taking his hand. "Victoria. And your mother said you were too upsetting." He frowned. "Didn't make sense to me. You never upset me." "I'm here now," she assured him, "and I found your journal, Dad. I know about Victoria and about what they've been doing with your money." Richard's expression sharpened, the fog of confusion temporarily lifting. "The journal, yes. Needed someone to know." He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "They think I don't notice. But I do, Jessie. When my mind is clear, I see what they've done." "Why didn't you ever tell me about Victoria?" Richard sighed deeply. "Your mother's arrangement. Not Victoria's fault how she came to us. But she grew up to be so much like Eleanor, cold, calculating. Only cares about appearances and money. Not like you." His eyes grew moist. "You're my true daughter in every way that matters. Kind like your grandmother was." "Dad, I need to ask you something important. The changes you wanted to make to your will. What exactly did you want to do?" His brow furrowed with concentration. "Everything to you and the boy. Parker. Good kid, Parker. Victoria and Eleanor have taken enough. Hidden accounts in the Caymans, property transfers to those shell companies. Documented it all." He tapped his temple. "Sometimes I remember everything clear as day. Wrote it all down. In the journal and the safe, home office behind the Remington painting. Combination is your birthday." He looked around suddenly, lowering his voice. "Don't trust Dr. Winters here. Takes orders from Victoria. Medication changes whenever I start asking questions." A chill ran through Jesselyn. "Are you saying they're sedating you when you're too lucid?" Richard nodded grimly. "Makes business sense, doesn't it? Keep the old man confused until everything's transferred. Victoria's specialty, hostile takeovers. His attempt at dark humor couldn't mask the betrayal in his eyes. Jesselyn's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Fifth, just arrived at your parents' house. E called her in a panic after getting call from facility. They were running out of time. Dad, I'm going to fix this. I promise. But I need your help. She pulled out a document from her bag. This is a revocation of the power of attorney you gave Victoria. My lawyer drew it up. If you sign it, it transfers authority to me instead. Richard read it slowly, methodically. Despite his illness, he had moments of sharp legal acumen from decades as a business titan. Finally, he nodded and signed with a steady hand. One more thing, Jesselyn said, producing a second document. This authorizes an emergency evaluation by an independent doctor, if he determines you're being over-medicated. We can cry foul, Richard finished signing again. Always were the strategic one. Victoria's too flashy goes for the obvious play. Jesselyn tucked the signed documents away just as her phone buzzed again. Victoria's on her way to the facility, 10 minutes out. Go, Richard urged. Back entrance through the hydrangea garden, staff doesn't monitor it. We'll talk again when it's safer. Jesselyn hesitated, reluctant to leave him. I'm fine, Jessie. Survived in business this long by knowing when to retreat and regroup. His eyes twinkled with a familiar strategic gleam. Besides, I think I'll request a medication review this afternoon. Might suddenly start feeling very strange about my current prescription. Jesselyn kissed his cheek and slipped out through the garden path he'd indicated. As she drove away, she called her attorney. The documents are signed. And I need to access a safe at my parents' house today. Can you send someone to accompany me? Officially, I mean. I'll do you one better, the attorney replied. Given the evidence of financial fraud, I've obtained an emergency inspection order for any financial records in the residence. I'm sending 2 paralegals and a forensic accountant. Meet them there in an hour. At precisely 2 p.m., Jesselyn stood on her parents' doorstep with 3 professionals in suits. Eleanor answered, her perfect composure slipping at the sight of them. Jesselyn, what is the meaning of this? Intrusion. Jesselyn handed her the court order. Financial inspection, mother. Completely legal. Eleanor scanned the document, her face paling. This is ridiculous. Your sister handles all the financial matters. Yes, Jesselyn replied coolly. That's precisely why we're here. As the forensic accountant and paralegals began their methodical search, Jesselyn headed straight for her father's study. Eleanor followed, protests streaming continuously. You have no right to invade our privacy like this. Victoria will be furious. Your father would be ashamed. Jesselyn stopped before the Remington painting, a Western scene her father had loved. Actually, mother, this was Dad's idea. She removed the painting, revealing the wall safe behind it. You don't know the combination, Eleanor said smugly. 061489. Jesselyn recited her birth date, and the safe clicked open. Inside were exactly what Richard had promised: detailed records of financial transfers, offshore account numbers, and a thumb drive labeled backup evidence. Most significantly, there was a notarized addendum to his will, dated just before his move to Oak Ridge, stating his intention to leave his estate to Jesselyn and Parker, with a modest provision for Victoria and her children. As Jesselyn handed these materials to the forensic accountant, her phone rang. The attorney again. Miss Mercer, we've just received concerning news from the independent physician at Oak Ridge. Your father's medication levels are significantly higher than his condition warrants. We're filing for emergency conservatorship on grounds of elder abuse. Eleanor, overhearing, sank into Richard's desk chair. You don't understand what you're doing, Jesselyn. This family, our position in society. I understand perfectly, mother. You and Victoria have been drugging my father while stealing his money and excluding his grandson from the family. Jesselyn's voice was steady, her resolve unshakable. It ends today. As she spoke, the doorbell rang. The forensic accountant answered it, returning with Victoria, whose carefully composed expression crumbled at the scene before her. "What have you done?" Victoria hissed at Jessalyn. "Only what Dad wanted," Jessalyn replied, holding up the journal. "By the way, there's something you should know about your birth. Something that might explain why Mom always favored you, despite how little you resemble either of our parents." Victoria's face went white as Jessalyn opened the journal to the relevant page. The family secrets were finally coming to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Mercer family estate's grand library, with its 2-story bookshelves and imposing marble fireplace, had hosted countless important meetings over the decades. Business mergers had been negotiated here, political campaigns launched, and society marriages arranged. Today it witnessed something far more explosive: the complete unraveling of the family's carefully constructed facade. Jessalyn sat at one end of the long mahogany table, Marcus beside her with a protective hand on her arm. Victoria and Eleanor occupied the opposite end, their usual confident postures now stiff with defensive anger. Between them sat Lawrence Blackwell, the family's longtime attorney, looking distinctly uncomfortable, and Dr. Caroline Reed, the independent physician who had evaluated Richard that morning. "Let me be clear about what we know," Jessalyn began, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Victoria is not Dad's biological daughter. She was privately adopted through questionable channels, and presented as a biological child to maintain appearances. Meanwhile, for years, Victoria and Mother have been systematically draining Dad's companies and personal accounts, through a network of shell corporations accumulating millions in offshore accounts." Victoria slammed her palm on the table. "These are outrageous accusations. Mother, are you going to let her continue with these delusions?" Eleanor remained silent, her aristocratic features frozen in a mask of disdain. Furthermore, Jessalyn continued sliding documents across the table. "Dad has been kept heavily sedated at Oak Ridge to prevent him from changing his will or exposing the financial fraud. Dr. Reed's evaluation confirms his medication levels were dangerously excessive and medically unjustified." Dr. Reed nodded solemnly. "Mr. Mercer's prescribed dosages were approximately 3 times what would be appropriate for his condition. When adjusted this morning, his cognitive function improved dramatically within hours." Victoria turned to Blackwell. "Lawrence, this is absurd. Tell them." The attorney cleared his throat. "I'm afraid, Mrs. Thompson, that the financial evidence Miss Mercer has presented is substantial. The transfers appear to violate several banking regulations and potentially constitute elder financial abuse." "And what about this adoption nonsense?" Victoria demanded, her voice rising to a near shriek. All eyes turned to Eleanor, who had yet to speak. The family matriarch adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture Jessalyn had rarely seen. "Victoria," Eleanor finally said, "certain arrangements were made before your birth. Arrangements that were necessary at the time." The color drained from Victoria's face. "What are you saying?" "Your father and I had an understanding. Our marriage was beneficial to both families, but not conventional. I needed certain freedoms. He needed an heir." "So it's true," Victoria whispered. "I'm not. You're not Richard's biological daughter," Eleanor confirmed without emotion. "Nor mine. But you have been raised with every advantage given the Mercer name and all its privileges. You've wanted for nothing." Victoria stood so abruptly her chair crashed backward. "Accept the truth. My entire identity is a lie." Her perfect composure cracked completely, tears streaming down her face. "Who are my real parents?" "That's irrelevant," Eleanor dismissed with a wave. "They were compensated generously and signed away all rights." "Irrelevant," Victoria's voice broke. "You stole me from my birth parents and lied to me my entire life, and you call that irrelevant?" Jessalyn watched her sister, or rather the woman she'd always believed was her sister, with unexpected compassion. Victoria had been as much a pawn in Eleanor's games as anyone. Victoria Jesselyn said softly, "Dad never held your origins against you. His journal shows he came to love you as his daughter. His issue was with the financial fraud and how you've treated Parker." Victoria rounded on her eyes, flashing through tears. "Don't pretend you care about my feelings now. You're just here to secure your inheritance." Actually, Jesselyn pushed another document forward. "Dad made provisions for you and your children, 10% of his estate, plus the Nantucket property you've always loved. Parker and I get the rest, but you're not left with nothing." Victoria laughed bitterly. "Crumbs from the table. More than you deserve after what you've done," Marcus interjected, speaking for the first time. "You excluded our son from family events, treated him like he was beneath you all, while stealing from his grandfather." "We need to discuss the legal ramifications," Blackwell interrupted, attempting to steer the conversation to practical matters. "There are serious potential charges here: elder abuse, financial fraud, identity fraud, possibly extending back decades." "What do you want?" Jesselyn Eleanor asked coldly. "To see your sister and me in prison, to destroy what remains of this family's reputation." "I want justice for Dad and for Parker," Jesselyn replied. "And I want the truth acknowledged after all these years of lies." "The truth," Victoria spat, "is that you've always been jealous of me. My life, my marriage, my children, your designer children to match your designer life," Jesselyn shot back. "You know what Parker said after that dinner at Bordeaux? He asked me why his cousins were more important than him. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to wonder why his family doesn't think he deserves dinner." Victoria had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before her defenses rose again. "One dinner? You're dismantling our entire family over one dinner." "No," Jesselyn corrected. "The dinner was just the final straw. This is about decades of lies, favoring one child over another, stealing millions from Dad, while drugging him into compliance. The dinner just opened my eyes to how deeply rotten things had become." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled. Outside rain had begun to fall, drumming against the library's tall windows. "What happens now?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice smaller than Jesselyn had ever heard it. "Dad is being moved to a different facility today, one where Victoria can't control his care. The offshore accounts have been frozen pending investigation, and tomorrow we meet with the district attorney." Jesselyn paused, looking directly at her mother. "Unless we can reach another arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Eleanor asked, cautiously. "A public acknowledgement of the financial impropriety. Full restitution of the diverted funds. Dad retains control of his companies and assets during his lifetime with me as his conservator given his condition. And an apology, a real one, to Parker." "And in return," Victoria demanded, "no criminal charges. The family name you both value so highly remains untarnished in public, though we'll know the truth privately." Eleanor and Victoria exchanged glances, a lifetime of silent communication passing between them. "And if we refuse?" Eleanor challenged. Marcus slid his phone across the table. On it was a drafted press release detailing the Mercer family scandal, ready to send to the Boston Globe and Wall Street Journal. "Then tomorrow morning the Mercer name becomes synonymous with fraud, elder abuse, and illegal adoption. Every society event you've ever hosted, every charity board you sit on, every exclusive club membership, all gone. Your friends will pretend they never knew you." Eleanor blanched. Social standing had always been her true currency. "You wouldn't," Victoria whispered. "Try me," Jesselyn replied, steel in her voice. "You drew the line when you excluded my son, while your children ate $100 steaks. Now I'm drawing mine." The rain intensified outside the library, darkening as storm clouds gathered. In that dimming light, Eleanor Mercer finally bowed her head in defeat. "We'll agree to your terms," she said tightly. "All of them," Jesselyn pressed. "Including the apology to Parker." "Yes," Victoria answered, before Eleanor could speak. "I'll apologize to Parker. Properly." Jesselyn nodded, feeling no triumph, only a weary relief. The papers will be drawn up by morning. Sign them, transfer the offshore funds back, and we never need to discuss this publicly." As the meeting concluded and the participants filed out, Eleanor caught Jesselyn's arm. "You're more like your father than I ever realized," she said, her tone making it unclear whether this was criticism or reluctant admiration. "Thank you, Jesselyn," replied simply. "I'll take that as a compliment." Later that evening, as Jesselyn tucked Parker into bed, her son looked up at her with curious eyes. "Mom, why did Aunt Victoria call today and invite us to her lake house this weekend? She never invites us anywhere." Jesselyn smoothed his hair gently. "Sometimes, honey, people realize they've made mistakes and want to make things right." "Is that why she said she has a surprise for me?" Maybe. Jesselyn smiled. "But whatever happens with the rest of the family, I want you to know that you deserve a place at every table and love from every heart. Never doubt that." As Parker drifted off to sleep, Jesselyn's phone buzzed with a text from her father's new facility. "Settled in well. Mind clearer than it's been in months. Proud of you, Jessie." The family dinner incident had catalyzed a reckoning decades in the making. The Mercer family would never be the same. But perhaps Jesselyn thought that was exactly as it should be. Hey everyone, we're halfway through this incredible journey of family secrets and justice. If this story of standing up for yourself against family betrayal is resonating with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button right now. Are you Team Jesselyn, or do you have some sympathy for Victoria after these revelations? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this type of family drama content, please subscribe to catch all my future storytelling videos. Now let's see how this family confrontation continues to unfold. The week following the confrontation passed in a blur of legal documents, financial transfers, and tense family negotiations. True to their word, Eleanor and Victoria signed the agreement Jesselyn's attorney had prepared, initiating the return of the misappropriated funds. Richard was thriving in his new facility, where proper medication management had resulted in longer periods of lucidity than he'd experienced in months. For Jesselyn, the victory felt hollow. Yes, she had secured justice for her father and ensured Parker's rightful place in the family legacy. But the cost had been the complete shattering of what family bonds remained. Despite the scheduled lake house visit, she harbored no illusions about genuine reconciliation with Victoria or her mother. On Friday afternoon, as Jesselyn packed an overnight bag for the weekend at Victoria's lake house, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Jesselyn Mercer?" a woman's voice asked when she answered. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Sophia Thompson, Victoria's daughter, your niece." Jesselyn sat down on her bed, surprised. 14-year-old Sophia had always been Victoria's mini-me, mimicking her mother's disdainful attitude toward Jesselyn's family. "Hello, Sophia. Is everything okay?" "Not really." The girl's voice was tight with emotion. "I overheard Mom and Grandmother talking about everything. About Mom not being a real Mercer, about the money they took, about how they treated Grandpa. And Parker." "I see," Jesselyn said cautiously. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way." "Is it true?" Sophia demanded. "All of it." "Yes," Jesselyn confirmed gently. "It's all true." A heavy silence followed, then a muffled sob. "I feel like my whole life is a lie. Mom isn't who I thought she was. Grandmother isn't. Nothing is real anymore." Jesselyn felt a surge of compassion for her niece. "Sophia, listen to me. Your mother is still your mother. She raised you, loves you. That's real. And you're still my niece, still part of this family. But the way we treated Parker," Sophia's voice cracked. "Mom told us he wasn't really family, because Uncle Marcus isn't a Mercer. But now it turns out, Mom isn't a Mercer either. It's so messed up." "It is," Jesselyn agreed. "But we can fix things going forward. That's why we're coming to the lake house this weekend, right?" "That's actually why I'm calling," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mom and Grandmother are planning something. I don't know exactly what, but they keep talking about securing what's rightfully ours and teaching Jesselyn a lesson. I think they're going to try to trick you somehow. Jesselyn's blood ran cold. Why are you telling me this, Sophia? You've always taken your mother's side. Because it's wrong, the girl replied simply. What they did to Grandpa, to Parker. I've been thinking about it all week. At that dinner when Parker didn't get any food, I knew beforehand. Mom told us not to say anything. I thought it was funny then. Her voice broke again. I don't think it's funny anymore. Jesselyn closed her eyes, processing this unexpected turn. Thank you for telling me, Sophia. That was brave. There's more, Sophia continued urgently. Mom had a meeting with Grandpa's old business partner yesterday, Mr. Holloway. They were in her office for hours. I heard something about alternate documentation and leverage. Gregory Holloway had been Richard's partner in several ventures decades ago, before a bitter falling out. If Victoria was meeting with him, it couldn't be good. Sophia, this is important. Do you know what documents they were discussing? No, but there's a safe in Mom's home office behind the painting of the sailboats. She's been putting papers in there all week. After ending the call with Sophia, Jesselyn immediately contacted her attorney and Abernathy, the investigator. Both advised caution, but agreed that the lake house visit should proceed with precautions. We need to know what they're planning, Abernathy said. If we cancel now, they'll just try something else later, possibly something we won't be warned about. The drive to Victoria's lake house in the Berkshires the next day was tense. Marcus kept glancing at Jesselyn with concern, while Parker chatted excitedly in the back seat, oblivious to the adult's anxiety. He was looking forward to using his cousin's new jet skis. Victoria greeted them at the sprawling lakefront property with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Welcome. The children are already down at the dock. Parker, why don't you join them? William has been asking when you'd arrive. As Parker ran off, Victoria turned to Jesselyn and Marcus. Mother's resting, but she'll join us for dinner. Can I get you something to drink on the terrace? The sunset view is spectacular. Jesselyn accepted with feigned enthusiasm. Part of her plan required getting Victoria comfortable and talkative. On the terrace overlooking the glittering lake, Victoria served white wine in crystal glasses. I've been thinking about what you said at the meeting, she began, her tone surprisingly conciliatory. About Parker feeling excluded. You were right. I treated him unfairly. Thank you for acknowledging that, Jesselyn said carefully. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Family should support each other, shouldn't they? Which is why I've been worried about something. She leaned forward. I'm concerned about Dad's new facility. I've heard concerning things about their management. He seems very happy there, Jesselyn countered. Perhaps for now. But their financial situation is precarious. I've been doing some digging. Victoria sipped her wine. I have a proposal that might benefit everyone. A joint conservatorship, shared decision-making for Dad's care and his estate. And there it was, the first move in whatever game Victoria was playing. I thought we settled all this with the agreement you signed, Jesselyn said. Victoria waved dismissively. Legal formalities. When it comes to family, we should be able to work things out ourselves, don't you think? After all, blood is thicker than water. Except we recently learned that's not entirely true in our case, Jesselyn replied pointedly. Victoria's expression hardened momentarily before she forced another smile. Let's discuss it more over dinner. Mother has some thoughts as well. As Victoria excused herself to check on dinner preparations, Marcus whispered, she's definitely up to something. Did you notice? She didn't actually apologize to Parker directly. I noticed, Jesselyn murmured. Keep an eye on the kids while I make a quick call. Stepping into the house, Jesselyn pretended to head toward the powder room, but instead quickly navigated to Victoria's home office. The door was unlocked. Victoria clearly hadn't expected Jesselyn to snoop during a family visit. The sailboat painting Sophia had mentioned hung prominently on the wall. After ensuring she was alone, Jessalyn removed the painting and found the digital safe behind it. On a hunch, she tried Victoria's birth date. Nothing. Then William's. Again, nothing. Finally she tried Richard's birth date, and the safe clicked open. Inside was exactly what Sophia had warned about, a folder labeled Mercer Enterprises Original Documentation, containing what appeared to be alternative versions of company ownership papers, with Victoria listed as primary heir and significant shareholder. There were also printed emails between Victoria and Gregory Holloway discussing contingency plans and evidence of Richard's mental incompetence predating the Alzheimer's diagnosis. They were planning to challenge Richard's competency retroactively, potentially invalidating years of business decisions, including his recent changes, benefiting Jessalyn and Parker. Quickly, Jessalyn photographed every document with her phone, before carefully replacing everything and returning to the terrace just as Victoria emerged from the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, Victoria announced. "Mother is coming down shortly. Why don't you collect Parker from the dock?" Dinner was an elaborate affair with Eleanor presiding at the head of the table in full matriarchal glory. The conversation remained superficially pleasant, with Victoria making pointed comments about family unity and shared decision-making, while Eleanor nodded approvingly. Parker, seated between his cousins, who were being uncharacteristically nice to him, seemed to be enjoying himself. Sophia caught Jessalyn's eye several times, her expression a mixture of guilt and resolution. As dessert was served, Eleanor cleared her throat. "Jessalyn, Victoria and I have been discussing a new arrangement regarding your father's care and companies, something more equitable." "I thought our current arrangement was quite clear," Jessalyn replied calmly. "Legal documents can be so cold," Eleanor said with a thin smile. "Family matters should be settled within the family." Victoria nodded, producing a folder from beside her chair. "I've drawn up a new agreement. Joint conservatorship, shared management of the companies, and a more balanced distribution of assets." "And if I don't agree?" Jessalyn asked. Victoria's smile hardened. "Then we'll be forced to present evidence that Dad has been mentally incompetent for much longer than recently diagnosed. Many of his business decisions over the past 5 years could be called into question, including any changes to his will or company structure favoring you." "That would be unfortunate," Jessalyn said, taking a bite of chocolate torte. "Especially since I have photographs of the fraudulent documents in your office safe, as well as your correspondence with Gregory Holloway about manufacturing evidence." Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "You went through my private safe after your daughter warned me you were planning something," Jessalyn replied. All eyes turned to Sophia, who flushed but lifted her chin defiantly. Sophia, Victoria's voice was dangerous. "You betrayed your own mother, you lied to everyone," Sophia burst out. "About who you are, about stealing from Grandpa, about excluding Parker for no reason." She turned to her grandmother. "And you helped her. How could you?" Eleanor looked as though she'd been slapped. "Young lady, you have no idea." "Actually, I do," Sophia interrupted. "I know exactly what you did. And I couldn't stay quiet anymore." William looked between his sister and mother, confusion evident on his face. "Mom, what's Sophia talking about?" Parker turned to Jessalyn. "Mom, what's going on?" The facade of family harmony had cracked completely. Victoria glared at Jessalyn with naked hatred. "You turned my own daughter against me." "No," Jessalyn said firmly. "Your actions did that. Sophia just has a conscience. Here's what's going to happen," Jessalyn continued, addressing both Victoria and Eleanor. "We're going to honor the original agreement. You will cease all attempts to undermine Dad's wishes or challenge his competency. In return, I won't press charges for the new evidence of conspiracy I discovered today." Eleanor started to protest, but Victoria silenced her with a raised hand. "And Sophia?" she asked coldly. "Sophia is 14, Jessalyn replied. "She's a child who deserves better from her mother and grandmother than to be used as a pawn in your schemes." The teenager's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted us to be a real family," she whispered. An uncomfortable silence descended on the dining room, broken only when Parker suddenly spoke up. "Can we still use the jet skis tomorrow?" he asked, innocently, causing William to snort with unexpected laughter. The tension fractured, if not completely broken. Even Victoria's lips twitched slightly. "Yes, Parker," she said after a moment. "You can use the jet skis tomorrow." Later that night, after Parker was asleep in one of the guest rooms, Sophia knocked on Jessalyn's door. "I'm sorry about everything," the girl said, hugging herself. "Mom's furious with me." "She'll get over it," Jessalyn assured her. "You did the right thing, Sophia. What happens now, with our family?" "I mean," Jessalyn considered the question. "Honestly, I don't know. But whatever happens, you'll always have a place with us if you need it." Sophia nodded, tears welling again. "Parker's lucky. You're the kind of mom I wish I had." As Jessalyn hugged her niece, she realized that perhaps the greatest victory wasn't the legal battle or financial restitution, but this moment of genuine connection with Sophia. Justice had many forms, and sometimes it came in unexpected ways. 3 months after the confrontation at the lake house, Jessalyn stood in her father's room at the Riverside Care Center, helping him adjust his tie. Richard's condition had stabilized with proper care and medication, and while he still had difficult days, his improvement had been remarkable. "Big day, Jessie," he said, eyes clear and focused. "Never thought I'd see it happen." "Me neither, Dad," she admitted, straightening the Windsor knot. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Richard squared his shoulders, a glimpse of the formidable businessman he once was. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Some things need witnessing. Downstairs in the center's garden pavilion, chairs had been arranged in neat rows before an improvised podium. The Mercer Enterprises board of directors occupied the front row alongside Marcus and Parker in matching suits. Sophia and William sat a few rows back without Victoria or Eleanor. Richard took his place at the podium, supported by Jessalyn. The assembled crowd, employees, business associates, and a few select reporters, fell silent. "Thank you all for coming today," Richard began, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "As you know, Mercer Enterprises has been undergoing significant restructuring. Today, I'm pleased to announce the appointment of my daughter Jessalyn Mercer as the new Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder." Applause rippled through the audience. In the back row, almost hidden behind a large fern, Victoria watched with an unreadable expression. She had accepted Jessalyn's final terms, attend the ceremony without causing a scene, and the more damning details of the financial fraud would remain private. "Mercer Enterprises was built on integrity and innovation," Richard continued, "values that Jessalyn embodies completely. Under her leadership, the company will establish the Parker Mercer Foundation, dedicated to Alzheimer's research and advocacy for ethical elder care." More applause, with Parker beaming at the mention of his name. The boy had grown inches taller in recent months, standing straighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his young shoulders. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, Sophia approached Jessalyn. "Congratulations," she said, giving her aunt a quick hug. "Grandfather seemed really good today." "He did," Jessalyn agreed. "How are things at home?" Sophia shrugged. "Quiet. Mom doesn't talk much anymore, at least not to me. Grandmother's moved in temporarily while her penthouse is being renovated." "And how are you doing with all of it?" "Okay, I guess." William's still clueless about most of what happened. Mom told him there was a business disagreement. "But I'm thinking about that offer to stay with you guys sometimes, on weekends if it's still open." "Always," Jessalyn assured her, squeezing her niece's hand. Across the room, Victoria had approached Richard. Jessalyn tensed, ready to intervene, but Marcus placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Your father can handle himself." From a distance, Jessalyn watched as Victoria said something that made Richard nod slowly. No embraces were exchanged, no dramatic reconciliation, but neither was there obvious hostility. It was a start, perhaps. Later that evening, as the family celebrated at home with pizza and ice cream, Parker's choice Jessalyn received a text from Victoria. "Congratulations, take care of the company." And Dad. No apology, no warmth, but an acknowledgement of the new reality. Jessalyn showed the message to Marcus. "Think she's finally accepted things?" he asked. "I don't know," Jessalyn admitted. "But at least she's not fighting anymore." The following week brought another surprise when Eleanor requested a meeting with Jessalyn at her downtown penthouse. Wary but curious, Jessalyn agreed. The penthouse was as impeccably decorated as ever, though Jessalyn noticed subtle changes: fewer family photographs, more abstract art. Eleanor, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and pearls, greeted her with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "Thank you for coming. Would you like tea?" "No, thank you," Jessalyn replied, remaining standing. "What did you want to discuss?" Eleanor gestured to the sofa. "Please sit, this won't take long." Once seated, Eleanor handed Jessalyn a manila envelope. "These are documents relating to Victoria's adoption. I thought, perhaps she should have them, but I can't give them to her myself." "Not yet." Jessalyn opened the envelope cautiously, finding birth certificates, legal papers, and something unexpected: a handwritten letter. Her birth mother wrote that before signing the final papers. Eleanor explained, her voice tight. "She was very young, just 19. The arrangement was not as straightforward as I led Victoria to believe." "You mean it wasn't entirely legal?" Jessalyn translated. "There were complications," Eleanor acknowledged. "But the girl wanted Victoria to have opportunities she couldn't provide. That part was true." Jessalyn studied her mother's face, searching for signs of manipulation. "Why are you giving me these now?" Eleanor looked away. "Because Victoria deserves the truth even if I can't face giving it to her myself. And because—" she hesitated. "Because you were right about many things. Not everything, but enough." It was as close to an apology as Eleanor Mercer had likely ever given. Jessalyn nodded slowly, accepting the gesture for what it was. "I'll make sure she gets these when she's ready," she promised. As fall turned to winter, the new family dynamic settled into an uneasy truce. Victoria gradually allowed Sophia to spend more time with Jessalyn's family, recognizing her daughter's need for connection. William, after learning more of the truth from Sophia, began reaching out to Parker, tentatively discovering shared interests in video games and science fiction. Richard continued to have good days and bad, but the good outnumbered the bad now. On Thanksgiving, he insisted on hosting a small dinner at his facility, just Jessalyn, Marcus, Parker, and surprisingly, Sophia and William, who came without their mother. "Victoria sends her regrets," Sophia explained, handing Jessalyn a bottle of wine with a card attached. The message inside was brief: "Maybe next year. V." As they gathered around the table, Richard raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To family," he said simply. "The one we choose, not just the one we're born to." Jessalyn touched her glass to his, feeling the truth of his words. Family wasn't defined by blood or birth certificates, but by love, loyalty, and yes, sometimes by hard-won justice. Parker, seated between his grandfather and Sophia, was explaining his latest science project with animated gestures. William, initially quiet, gradually joined the conversation. For the first time, there was no artificial hierarchy, no subtle exclusion. Everyone at the table belonged there equally. Later, as Richard tired and the younger generation moved to the recreation room for board games, he pulled Jessalyn aside. "You did good, Jessie," he said, patting her hand. "Fixed what I couldn't." "We fixed it together, Dad," she corrected gently. He nodded, eyes growing distant as they sometimes did when fatigue set in. "Family dinner," he murmured. "Everyone gets fed. That's how it should be." "Yes," Jessalyn agreed, remembering the restaurant where this had all begun. "Everyone gets fed." In the months that followed, Mercer Enterprises thrived under Jessalyn's leadership. The Parker Mercer Foundation launched its first research grant. Richard had more good days. Victoria began attending family events, occasionally maintaining a polite distance, but no longer actively hostile. Eleanor remained more removed, though she sent appropriate gifts on birthdays and holidays. Some wounds were too deep or too old to heal completely. But the veneer of family perfection had been replaced by something more authentic if messier. The final piece fell into place the following spring when Jessalyn received a call from Victoria. "I've been going through therapy," her sister said without preamble. "Part of my recovery is making amends. I treated Parker badly. I'd like to apologize to him directly if you'll allow it." Jessalyn, surprised but cautiously optimistic, agreed. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a park where Parker liked to fly the drone he'd received for his 11th birthday. Victoria arrived alone, dressed more casually than Jessalyn had seen her in years, jeans and a simple blouse, hair pulled back in a ponytail. Parker greeted her with typical preteen awkwardness. "Hi, Aunt Victoria." "Hello, Parker," she replied, equally awkward. "That's a nice drone." "Thanks. Mom got it for my birthday." An uncomfortable silence followed, until Victoria visibly gathered her courage. "Parker, I need to apologize to you. I was unkind and unfair, at the restaurant and many times before that. You didn't deserve any of it." Parker considered this with surprising maturity. "Why were you mean to me? Did I do something wrong?" "No," Victoria answered, her voice cracking slightly. "You never did anything wrong. I was jealous, I suppose, of your mom, of how she chose to live her life authentically while I was still trying to be perfect. And I took that out on you, which was unforgivable." Parker shrugged. "I forgive you. Mom says holding grudges just makes you feel bad inside." Victoria blinked rapidly, visibly moved by the simple wisdom. "Your mom is right about that. Do you want to try flying my drone?" Parker offered, extending an olive branch in the most 11-year-old way possible. As Victoria tentatively took the controller, Jessalyn watched from a nearby bench, thinking about the journey that had brought them here from a restaurant where Parker had gone hungry, while his cousins feasted, to this moment of genuine connection. Justice had been served not through revenge or public humiliation, but through truth and accountability. The Mercer family would never return to what it was, but perhaps it could become something better, something real. Parker's laughter rang out as the drone executed a perfect loop under Victoria's guidance. Some wounds could heal after all, Jessalyn thought. Some tables could be reset to include everyone. Some families could be rebuilt, one authentic connection at a time. 1 year to the day after the fateful dinner at Bordeaux, Jessalyn stood in her kitchen putting the finishing touches on a homemade lasagna, Parker's favorite. The house hummed with activity as Marcus set the dining room table and Parker arranged a centerpiece he'd made in art class. "Do you think Grandpa will remember it's been a year?" Parker asked, adjusting a colorful arrangement of hand-painted ceramic flowers. "I'm not sure," Jessalyn answered honestly. "But I think on some level he understands that today is special." The doorbell rang, and Parker raced to answer it. Richard entered slowly, supported by his full-time caregiver, but smiling broadly at the sight of his grandson. "There's my boy," he said, ruffling Parker's hair. "Growing taller every time I see you." Behind them came Sophia and William, now regular visitors to the Mercer household. Victoria followed, carrying a bakery box. "Dessert," she explained, handing it to Jessalyn. "From that place on Newbury Street that Parker likes." The gesture, remembering Parker's favorite bakery, spoke volumes about how far they'd come. Eleanor had declined the invitation, sending a brief note about a prior commitment. Some divides remained too wide to bridge completely, and Jessalyn had made peace with that reality. As they gathered around the table, a far cry from the exclusive restaurant where their journey had begun, Jessalyn took a moment to appreciate the scene, her father still present despite his illness, her son confident and thriving, her husband steadfast through everything, her niece and nephew now genuine friends to Parker, and Victoria, not exactly a friend but no longer an enemy. I'd like to say something, Jesselyn announced, raising her glass. A year ago we had a very different kind of family dinner. Today I want to acknowledge how far we've come. Not everything is perfect and not everything is resolved, but we're here together, and everyone has a place at this table. Victoria raised her glass in response. To second chances, she said quietly, and to truths, however difficult they may be. Richard, in a moment of perfect clarity, added, to my grandsons and granddaughter, the future of our family. As they ate, conversations flowed naturally. William and Parker discussed their joint science fair project. Sophia shared news about her school's debate team victories. Victoria spoke of her volunteer work with an adoption rights organization, a new passion born from her own experience. After dinner, as Richard rested in the living room with Marcus while the teenagers played video games upstairs, Victoria helped Jesselyn load the dishwasher. I never thought we'd be here, Victoria admitted, handing Jesselyn a plate. A year ago I hated you. I know, Jesselyn replied simply. I'm not sure I ever really understood why until recently, Victoria continued, staring out the kitchen window. My therapist says I was trying to prove I belonged in the family by being more Mercer than the actual Mercer. And now, Victoria turned to face her. Now I'm trying to figure out who I am without that. It's not easy. Family never is, Jesselyn agreed. But I think we're doing better. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, Parker presented each person with a small handmade gift, painted stones bearing words he'd chosen for each recipient. Richard's read, strength. Marcus's read, support. Sophia and William received courage and growth, respectively. When Parker handed Victoria her stone, she turned it over to read the inscription, New Beginnings. Her eyes met Jesselyn's over Parker's head, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. The wounds of the past hadn't vanished, but they had begun to heal. The table had been reset. Everyone had been included. Everyone had been fed, not just with food, but with acceptance and truth. As Richard prepared to leave with his caregiver, he pulled Jesselyn close. Remember when I told you things aren't always what they seem, he whispered, a flash of his old sharpness in his eyes. Yes, Dad. I remember. Sometimes they're worse, he continued. But sometimes, Jessie. Sometimes they're better. This is better. Watching her father leave, supported between his caregiver and Victoria, an alliance that would have seemed impossible a year ago, Jesselyn felt the truth of his words. The perfect family she had once yearned for had never existed. The authentic family they were building now, with all its complications and imperfections, was something far more valuable. Parker slipped his hand into hers. Good dinner, Mom. The best, she agreed, squeezing his fingers. Everyone had a place. And next time, Grandma Eleanor might come too, maybe, Jesselyn said, not wanting to promise what she couldn't guarantee. We'll keep setting a place for her just in case. As the last guest departed and the house settled into evening quiet, Jesselyn stood in the doorway watching the taillights of Victoria's car disappear down the street. From family betrayal to fragile new beginnings, their journey had come full circle. Some debts could never be fully repaid. Some hurts would always leave scars. But justice had many forms, and sometimes the most powerful wasn't found in courts or contracts, but in the simple human dignity of a place at the table, in the acknowledgement of worth, in the breaking of bread together as equals. For Parker, for her father, and yes, even for herself, that was enough. If you've made it to the end of this family journey with me, I can't thank you enough. This story of justice and healing resonated deeply with me, and I hope it touched you too. Have you ever experienced a family dynamic shift like Jesselyn's? What would you have done in her situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of family karma coming full circle, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories that explore the complexities of family relationships and the power of standing up for yourself. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve a place at the table too. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the family we rebuild is stronger than the one we were born into.